your life.
George, ¿me escuchas?
Sí.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sí, sí.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, I had a connection issue. If it, I removed the VPN, so I think it should be solved now. Okay, so is everybody ready to start? George,
Yes.
basically,
Sí.
are you ready to start?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sorry about this. So my name
Nah.
is Alain Lamedine. I'm with the One Democratic State Initiative, and I have the honor to moderate this discussion that's organized by the Palestine Dialogue Group. So we have George Simon Gutierrez. So you are an activist for Palestine in Latin America. Can you tell us about
Yes.
you, what you do, and then maybe I and the others will have more questions for you.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to everybody, to Raúl in El Salvador, to Alain, and to all my friends here. I'm George Simán Gutierrez. My father immigrated from Bethlehem in 1952 with my grandma and my grandfather Isa and my aunt. They used to live in Bethlehem, like most of the Palestinians, with a good standard of living, having everything, not luxuries and not, a huge reserve of material things, but with whatever they could live in a fine life until the 1948 came along and everything shattered for them. Their life as they knew it started to crumble. They were the lucky ones that were in Bethlehem and we didn't get all the backlash from the Nakba at the beginning. But what they saw in happening so close to them, like 9 kilometers away in Quds, in Jerusalem, my grandfather decided to emigrate, and they just came to Colombia, where some Palestinians already were, some family of them. So basically, I come from them. My mom is Colombian, even though she looks more Palestinian than my father, as a matter of fact. But she's Colombian, and I was raised in this bicultural home, which I am so grateful to have. And one thing I told Siti, my grandma, which, by the way, her name was Rahme, but when she came to Colombia, they changed it in the immigration center. They used to change everybody's name. My father's name was George, like me, but when he came to Colombia, through the north, in the Caribbean city, they used to change their names, and they put Jorge, which is the Colombian name for the Spanish name for George, or for Giris in Spanish, in Arab. My grandma Siti, her name was Rahme, and she they changed it to Carmen, which phonetically it's similar, but it has nothing to do with the original name of Rahme, which in Spanish means pity, piedad. And well, with my three aunts, they came to Barranquilla, which is the fourth main city in Colombia in the north, the Caribbean. A city, very cosmopolitan city, which accepted immigrants from everywhere. We have a lot of Italians, French. Well, not a lot, but in Colombia is one of the most cosmopolitan city, maybe the most. A lot of Jewish Europeans escaping from that, Nazi threat in Europe. Polish, and mainly the Jewish and the Arabs in my hometown. They built a strong industry and commerce, and they took along very well. And till nowadays, my city is run mostly by Arabs, especially Syrian and Fellestini. They have the economical and political power, even though they have not translated this into action for Palestine. But this, I guess we will talk about it later. So basically, I'm a Colombian Palestinian, and I got influenced by my family, because every single day we spoke about Palestine. Even though I started really to learn about Palestine 7 years ago after I went. Somebody told me, when you go to Palestine, you will never be the same. So that's true, because after I went to Palestine for a few days, I was never the same. I realized that I have to be more intense and more active on speaking about Palestine. As a matter of fact, I promised Siti, before she died, I promised, Siti, I will never stop talking about Palestine. I promise you this. So that's what I do. So I speak a lot. So anytime you want to shut me up, it's fine.
Okay.
That's basically
I don't think I'd be shutting you up. It's very interesting. So you said this was your stand on Palestine, and that when you went to Palestine, it changed the way you view it, or how intense do you feel about it? How do Palestinians in Latin America feel about it? Those who, I mean, they have, it's the land of their grandfathers and grandmothers. So how do they feel about it?
Well, in the last 10 years, I can say, there has been disengagement between the descendants of Palestini, Latin Americans, and the homeland. Why? I cannot attribute it to one reason, but maybe it's simply they are forgetting and they don't care. Most of them. Yeah. We have a huge base of support in people that have any genetic or blood link to Palestine. Latin Americans, just because they love justice, we have a lot, despite all the massive propaganda they receive from everywhere, especially through religious influence and through propaganda. Like, Israel sells itself like if they were the saviors of the universe, and they are fighting terrorism, and they are so advanced and technologically, despite all this huge propaganda, which we all know that is crap. Sorry, but that's what it is. There's a huge, massive support for Palestine in the common Latin America, because they say, oh, we are not, there's the real the tiny David versus the big Goliath is not what they told us. Thanks to social media, they are watching what is really happening in Palestine. But the Palestinian origin, since most of them are rich and powerful, now their homeland is their money and their power and their privilege. So they just think that, why I'm going to get into this mess anyway? I'm happy here. I'm fine here. I'm living a good life. Why I'm gonna get into this mess? I don't want to have enemies. I don't want my American visa canceled because this is what they think. So I'm not gonna talk. Okay, I hope they all get along. They are all normalization supporters, and this is so disgusting for me. But I mean, I see them with pity, with disgust, because they are forgetting where they came from. Meanwhile, the Latin American public is still every time adding up on the Palestinian side. This is what I can see. So I'm
Can
sorry
you
for
tell
them.
us more about? Can you tell us more about the non-Palestinian? So, like maybe the left in Latin America.
Yeah. Actually, it's very different from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, many politicians were supporting Palestine because there were more ideals, more principles. Now, I guess this is a very common trace on the Palestinian politics, Latin American politics. The influence of the United States has become different from the 70s and the 80s in the sense that it's not a very palpable, armed, violent influence as it was before. Now it's very subtle with money, so they know where and how to buy people off. Politicians are so easy to buy with anything, and anyone who stands up for Palestine or any friend of Palestine, they will be charged, they will be accused of anti-Semitism, and of course their political career will crumble. Despite of this, still there are many voices on Latin America that support Palestine, and among politicians, but mostly among common public, because the social media, I guess, since the appearance of Facebook, Twitter, and all these outlets, show in real time what the main news channels, which have lost a lot of protagonism in the last years, they don't show. So social media has waken up people's conscience, and people are getting curious about what's really going on in Palestine. And spontaneously, not like the Israeli propaganda. Israel has a huge budget called for digital diplomacy. This is their fancy name for basically having mercenaries on the web, just to try to oppress anyone who speaks on Palestine, calling them anti-Semite and all this crap, which I don't buy a long time ago. So what you see in Latin America is many people spontaneously wanting to know about Palestine. Personally, almost every day, I receive comments from people, Colombians mostly, or Mexicans, from all Latin America, telling me, thank you, I've learned something about Palestine. I had no idea. Thank you to your account. And my account, basically, I don't get into Twitter to have money. I don't get into Twitter to have influence. I don't want to be influencer of anything because, I mean, what other topic more dangerous and more friendly to find enemies, that the Palestinian topic. So, and like me, there are many people spontaneously without any other further interest than just justice for Palestine. And we should always have in mind that Latin America is a region that is very highly influenced by religion. And evangelical religion, which I used to be for 7-8 years. I had my first marriage was evangelical. Not because I really believed in evangelical, but my wife back then was evangelical. So I said, what the hell? I'm gonna go to the church with her. I'm gonna go with the flow. And I became evangelical for 7 years. And I know the influence of evangelicals in Latin America. You know what they think. They believe that Palestine should be for the Jewish people, no matter if they come from Ukraine or they come from El Salvador or China, whatever. They say that if Palestine is Jewish, the Messiah will come. And they want the Messiah to come to make people that don't believe in Jesus believer, including the Jews. So this is an alliance that is very weak. And I see every day it crumbling because Jewish, Zionist or no, and I'm with them absolutely. They don't like Christians They don't like Christians because they know the past, that they have been harassed by Christians in Europe and everywhere. So they don't trust each other. But, evangelicals have this idea that, oh, Jesus will come when Palestine will be Jewish, so we support Israel. They in the church, they have Israeli flags. Instead of speaking about the good things Jesus may have thought, they speak about Israel, asking for blessings for Israel. And I tell them, do you believe that the teachings of your Messiah, which were basically love, are compatible with a state created in 1948 dedicated to ethnic cleansing? Is this what your Messiah would have advocated for? Nah. So many people are opening their eyes. Many people are opening their eyes. I also speak about the dangers of conflating Judaism with Zionism, because the whole thing started because the Jews were persecuted all the time. So I understand why should they want some place for themselves. Of course, I mean, they were humiliated, persecuted everywhere for whatever reason. Okay, so but why do Palestinians have to pay for this? That's what I tell people. So on all this mess, we are trying to give many people spontaneously and for free. We have tried to give a light on the real situation. And basically, the real situation is not 2,000 years ago. The real situation is now. The real situation is all the refugees, all the harassment, all the ethnic cleansing against the people that only want to live happily. Because if you go to Palestine or the Palestinian culture, I'm Colombian, and my country, despite all the problems, have a lot of happiness. People are happy despite the huge problems we have here. But I have never seen such a resilient and happy people and decent people as the Palestinians, despite all the 75 years of tragedy and even more. If we are very strict on the history, it's more than 75 years that they have been suffering this. So,
I hear you.
Yeah. So basically, I don't know if I have been extended on the answer, but basically, to go back to the first question, these Palestinian Colombians, in my case, Palestinian Latin Americans, most of them forget conveniently because they are in a good position economically, but Latin Americans in general are summing up and are thinking. They don't really understand, most of them, the problem, but at least they are not buying the Israeli propaganda completely, because they use some logic and they see what's happening and say, wait, the story that you are the victim and the Palestinians are the terrorists is not exactly what we are seeing. So people are thinking. Translating this into political power is very difficult, and I'm finishing with this, the first part, because Palestine doesn't have a strong diplomatic lobby, a strong diplomatic representation. We all know the Palestinian Authority, especially in their embassies in Latin America, it's a bunch of useless parasites, which they don't have really an agenda. They just want to have some money for their pension with the taxes that Palestinians pay. So there's not a very organized lobby with very close objectives. Like the Israeli diplomacy is really good and really strong. They do have their objectives, and they get everywhere in the political spectrum of Latin America, from the presidents to the majors and small political and economic leaders in every town in Latin America. They know how to buy them with little things. Oh, I will do this. I will give you a scholarship in Tel Aviv. Yeah. Palestine. Okay, Palestine doesn't have the resources, but with the will and with organization, we can do way better than that. But they don't care. The Palestinian Authority don't care. They just wanted their monthly check. So despite all this, our popular support is growing. That's my perception. Okay, with common people. And these people, I'm sorry, but I'm going to finish with it. These common people, at the end, they will not consume Israeli stuff. They will not buy Israeli propaganda. This is what I'm betting on. We have nothing else.
I hear you. This is all very interesting, and you don't be sorry. All the details you're sharing are very interesting. I think what you're doing with social media is very good, because you are reaching out to normal people, not to elites who can be bought with money. And I think that you're emphasis on how to turn this into political power is it's the right way to think. Because if people have an opinion but it's not translated into political power, we're just a sitcom, just something interesting. So maybe we can talk more about this. But first, we have several people with us. We have Raul Miguel, we have Sarah, we have Hassan. Do you have anything to say, anything to ask?
Well, personally, I agree with what George said. The Palestinian community, sadly, in Latin America, is not pretty much involved in what's going on in Palestine recently, and we've got a lot of years right now. And as well, what is very concerning is that the new generations of Palestinians are not connected back with their homeland, and they really don't know what is going on. And as well, there is a lack in, I think, not only in Latin America, but in the Palestinian diaspora in all the world, that there is the lack of a strong Palestinian diplomacy or entity or leadership has make it difficult for like the diaspora to get involved, all of them towards the same cause or be united towards a vision for the liberation or the national position. And so in Latin America, I can say my experience, I agree with what George said, and that's my comment on it.
Can I ask a quick question about the president of El Salvador? So since a few years, the president of El Salvador is of Palestinian origin. Has this in fact affected the cause positively in any way?
No, actually,
George is laughing. Apparently not.
Please,
it's affected it
after
negatively.
Raul, please, I want to hear Raul because I think we agree. But after Raul, I want to say something about.
Sure.
I mean,
Raul, sorry.
His dad, he was a very prominent figure in El Salvador's politics. He was a very respected man, very intelligent. However, his son, Nayib Bukele, when it comes to El Salvador and the national politics, he's very majority of the people like him. However, when it comes to his Palestinian side, he has been absolutely absent. He does not represent it. Actually, when he doesn't talk about it too much out in public. He only has said publicly that he's of Palestinian origin, but he does not give his opinion about the conflict. And of course, I don't believe that he will ever say something about it or pro-Palestine, given his position and the influence of the United States in El Salvador as well.
Okay. George, you had something to add.
Yeah, I was talking with Raul earlier about this. Bukele, his father was very pro-Palestinian, right? But this guy came to power, and the first thing he did was going to Quds, but not to the Palestinian side. He went to Bat Yashem Museum, which, okay, everybody should, remember the Holocaust and whatever crime against humanity. It's a common cause for all. You cannot defend Palestinian cause without defending any other just cause for humanity, and including what the Jews lived in Europe, especially for many years. But we all know that this visit to the museum is not only to honor the humanity and the Jewish. This visit is to surrender to Netanyahu. This is the first thing this puppet went to do for Quds. And in Twitter, I wrote this to him 1 year ago or so. I don't know. I remember when the first thing you did in your government was this. So suddenly I got blocked. I'm basically nobody. I do my little work day by day, one-on-one here in all Latin America, speaking to people every day. I'm sure somebody, at least one or two people, learn on Palestine because I speak to them, or they read what I write, post. At least they have some curiosity. But this guy with all this power, he's afraid of the United States. And the first thing he goes and is, can I say something in Arab? Bad word? He goes and kiss the tissy of the American of Netanyahu. Kiss Netanyahu's ass. The first thing he does. Of course, I got blocked, and he names his representative in Colombia, a Lebanese, very rich Lebanese guy from my city, which doesn't gives nothing for Palestine cause, because I know him personally from my city. The only thing he does is earn money and be a mean guy. So this is the first thing they did. So Bukele is one perfect example of what the Palestinians who came to Latin America were so lucky, because they didn't stay for Nakba. And the least thing they have to do, if they didn't put their blood and the blood of their children in Nakba, like me, I'm a lucky guy. I didn't die on Nakba as many of my fellow Palestinian people did. So the least thing I should do is to be a little decent and never forget Palestine and work on Palestine somehow, either sending some money to the people that are really working for Palestine, or speaking on it, or have something here on Latin America that supports, keeps Palestine alive, because this is what people tell you there to do. People there are very realistic. They ask you, please never forget Palestine. This is what they asked me when I was there. Okay? So at least Bukele and the people with their power, without, okay, you don't want to mess with the United States. I can understand that. Okay, don't, but at least do some diplomacy on Palestine. But people like him is what I despise the most, because with all the means, they are afraid that speaking the truth and being fair, they can lose some of their many privileges. And their main privilege is to be alive, because they perfectly could be in a mass grave like Tantura in the beach of Jaffa. So I don't respect people like that. I want to do something. I want to tell you something. I do whenever I can a diplomacy, what I call the kufiyya diplomacy. I buy kufiyas, original from Al Halil, from a friend that buys a lot of kufiyas, and I try to give it away to students and to politicians and to professors. And I tell them what this kufiyya means. This is one thing. I mean, why Bukele doesn't give away 1,000 kufiyas at least?
Yeah. I understand.
I would like to add as well.
Go ahead, Raul.
As well, like in the Palestinian community, for example, in El Salvador and Honduras, it's very present culturally, and yes, Palestine is remembered, but it's mostly on the basis of culture, music, food, weddings. I mean, you can see that, especially the older generations still have their culture, and like people speak Arabic. The new generations know, but the older, yes. And in El Salvador, for example, there is a Club Árabe Palestino, an Arab Palestinian club, as well in Honduras. And so the communities have kept kind of their cultural and heritage and language, but when it comes to the politics, there actually is no opinion or strong opinion about it. And as well, the Palestinian Authority, the embassies are very involved with the communities in Latin America. And of course, the narrative of the PA is implemented in the communities and societies. And as a result, the communities adopt the two-state vision. And of course, no one wants to come up with something against that vision, which is the diplomatically correct vision or internationally recognized position, because the Palestinian embassy, is supposed to represent the Palestinian people and officially goes out and says the two-state solution, with this solution as the capital and all of that. And so at the end of the day, people remain uneducated on the matter and without willing to actually speak for a change or a different perspective of what should be done for the future. And that is really, I believe, that is one of the biggest parts of the Palestinian problem towards the future of liberation, that our supposedly called representatives and leaders are actually are not letting us actually move forwards or towards a better future for true liberation, training people from not being able to express themselves or further their knowledge towards new visions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See.
Sarah Hassan, would you have anything to add, to ask, a comment? Okay, so George, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So your stand on the PA leadership is clear. Your stand on the liberation of all of Palestine and not just the. Oh, Sarah, you were trying to speak. We couldn't hear you. I don't know why. Do you want to type instead? Okay, so I'll go ahead with my question to you, George, and meanwhile, maybe Sarah can fix the problem or type. So your stand on the PA is clear. Your stand on the two-state thing is clear. You spoke about translating these efforts politically. Do you think there's any way this can be done?
I think that meanwhile something happens with the PA. I mean, the main enemy of Palestine today, I think, is the PA.
Yes.
All this bunch of parasites. Meanwhile, I think they will crumble because the Palestinian people, they cannot stand this forever. You know, till then, I think, I mean, I'm very anxious at this, and my management of this anxiety has been trying to channel through education. So meanwhile, I think the duty of every Palestinian in the diaspora is to educate their family, their friends, and their community on what's going on in Palestine. And never subestimate the power of this, because I've learned so many examples in the last 7 years, maybe 6-7 years, of people opening their eyes. Even religious people, you know what I told you before, that religion is such a good piece of propaganda for the Zionist movement. But meanwhile, I mean, politicians in Latin America move on money, only on money. That's basically, maybe in the whole world, but especially in Latin America. And Raul may support me on this, maybe, because, you know, every country in Latin America is the same. We don't have the money to equal the Israeli lobby. That's impossible. But we can appeal to decency. And even though it may be utopic, I'm sure at least somebody will listen, because I know in Colombia, some politicians listen and they don't let themselves sell for the Israeli lobby. Of course, they are a minority, but there's also legal challenges, legal situation that will prohibit politicians to go further. Like, I mean, it's illegal to put their Israeli embassy in Quds, for example. You just have to write them, and you just have to need some legal support and tell the state wherever you are, Colombia, Salvador, Chile, whatever, to abide by the law. Nothing fights with that. Okay? So meanwhile, education and action, the most we can. Of course, people get tired because some people say, I mean, where are we going with this? I want to live a happy life. I mean, you have to find happiness on the struggle, because the other way is to betray your people that made such an heroic effort, a sacrifice to keep you alive. Because most of Palestinian Latin Americans, they don't realize they are alive because somebody in their older generations took a very painful decision and said, oh, I have to get out of here to be alive. Of course, maybe the decent thing was to stay and fight, but also you can fight from somewhere else. So
okay. So this fight from somewhere else. So you're talking about education. You're talking about an appeal to decency. I'm wondering, can this be made in an organized way? Meaning, for example, the people who follow you, is there any way they can sign up so we can have their names and numbers? Can we get a social media movement organized so there's not just you or some people talking? We have maybe a team of 10,000 people who can do Twitter storms. Maybe we can build lobbies that contact pro-Palestinian people or political movements. Maybe they can enter political movements. Is there any way this can get organized?
Well, that's a very important main question. The honest truth is that no, we have nothing on that. But I'm telling you something. We have nothing of that because basically there's nothing we can attach to.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Zionist is easy because they go to the Israeli embassy and they have all this support. Okay. We have some organizations. I don't belong to anybody, but I help. We have some cultural organizations in Colombia. We have some stronger organizations in Chile. And there's not a main party, political party, but for example, in Chile, there's a bilateral group of politicians, doesn't matter what their political spectrum is, color is, they united for Palestine. In Colombia, we have some leftist parties that support Palestine, but it's not that their main flag, their main issue is Palestine, because there are so many internal problems that, you know, but they, when it's time to stand for Palestine, they stand politically with Palestine. And I don't believe this will be for other reason that because many of the electorate, they have been educated on Palestine based on what many people spontaneously, as I told you before, have done. So basically, we don't have a specific movement on Palestine. And this is one huge challenge that I've been thinking about. And this is the next step. But we don't have nothing to attach to, you know, because I mean, there's no umbrella, political umbrella for us.
Yeah.
Nothing, because basically the Palestinian embassy and the Palestinian political representation is a zero to the left. It's not only a zero to the left, it's worse. They are friends of the Zionists.
Yeah.
I want to tell you something. The Palestinian ambassador to Colombia just recently accused one of my fellow friends that honestly and without any interest advocates for Palestine. He accused him of being a Hamas traitor, a betrayer of Hamas. I mean, a guy that is not even affiliated to any political party. This is how Palestinian politicians do a harm to our cause here.
Raul, you have something to say?
I would like to add to what George said. I personally believe that ever since the Oslo Accords were signed, the Palestinian cause has lacked a competent political leadership. And if we're talking about a decolonization movement, a liberation movement, we're the ones that need to do it. It's our responsibility to do it. And if we don't have a political leadership and organization, then how are we going to do it? And as a result of this, I believe that since we know who the PA serves, and the lack of a political leadership has meant that the only way to resist the Zionist colonial endeavor has gone through armed resistance, which does its job and will continue to do it with all the right to do so. But we also need a political resistance because, as we have talked before, it is not sufficient in itself. And so for the decolonization movement, the liberation struggle, we're lacking like a political representation that unites all the Palestinians around the world towards the same vision. Because I believe that probably the biggest flaw of the Palestinian cause right now is that we as Palestinians are not united as a whole, as one group, one nation, one vision towards liberation, but rather we are divided between factions. And there is not like a national consensus on the vision for liberation. And so if we want to talk about our liberation and our future, first, we need to organize ourselves internally and have our own vision to go towards it. But we cannot do it if we're separated and divided. And as well, people say a free Palestine from the river to the sea, yes, perfect, and that's the goal. But we have to do it somehow. It's not going to happen out of a miracle. And we need to be organized for that to happen. And as well, we can continue, we cannot expect changes in a better future if we continue with the same things that are today. We cannot expect different results while doing the same things. And that's why I believe that what the Palestinian cause desperately needs is like a complete political reformation or an urgency for leadership, a competent leadership that actually frames the cause and not as a human rights struggle against apartheid, but rather as a decolonization struggle against the Zionist sexual colonization of Palestine, and that advocates for a new a new political reality that answers the questions for this future of Palestine. Because I also believe that, for example, in Europe, a lot of people don't like to speak or to present support for Palestine because their fear of then what will happen to the Jewish population of Palestine, the Israelis. And so as long as these questions are not answered by Palestinians, this leaves a lot of space for negative speculation to surround the Palestinian cause. And therefore, it's our responsibility as Palestinians to come up, organize, and to respond to the platform for the world to hear and know the official Palestinian vision and proposal, and us to put it on the table in order to attract international support. But of course, first we need to come up with this new movement, new leadership that unites the nation. Because if we're not united, then we cannot expect anything to advance or proceed. And of course, we have this big problem that within ourselves we have enemies that are not letting us to advance towards this goal, this vision. And so that's what the major step or the first step that needs to be done by the Palestinian people, to organize ourselves towards the vision. And I believe that this vision is the one democratic state vision from the river to the sea, and secular in the state, that it does not allow religious influences, religious beliefs to influence the policy making of the state, while at the same time allowing the freedom of worship of the citizens in the state. And so I believe that first the Palestinian public needs to be educated around this matter and to kind of come up with this leadership that brings up this vision, this spirit toward the national public in order to actually make a change.
By the way, I just had one thing to what Raul is saying. So, George, maybe this is something that could be interesting to you. So, the One Democratic State Initiative is one of its purposes is to build a new Palestinian political movement that is outside Fatah and Hamas, and that is also not limited to a specific area of the world. So today, for example, we have Palestinian political parties like Al-Tajammu' that only work in 48. They do nothing in Lebanon, they do nothing in Gaza, they do nothing in the West Bank, they do nothing in Latin America. On the other hand, we have Fatah, for example, that does nothing in 48. So this fragmentation of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, it's very Zionist in itself, because it's playing the Zionist game. So we are trying to build a Palestinian political movement that is not based in the West Bank or in 48 or in Gaza or anywhere else. That is worldwide. For example, my job in this initiative is to try and build a presence in Lebanon and Jordan. For example, Raul is working to build this presence in Latin America. We have others who are working to build it in 48. We have a meeting with Mustafa Barghouti this week to try and create something in the West Bank. And the purpose is to attach all these like vague pro-Palestinian movements, because what does I am with Palestine really mean? Because I can say I am with Palestine and be with the two-state solution. So what does it mean? We're trying to attach it to a vision to, as you said, liberate all of Palestine from the river to the sea, but without having a problem with the Jewish religion. So maybe we can also discuss this further. We have the website in Spanish as well.
I agree absolutely on this vision, and I am willing to work. I have not attached to any movement because they don't have this vision. They don't have. I don't trust their intentions. I don't trust them. But in this movement, I am willing to work. I hope Raul can contact me if you give him my or vice versa my contacts, because I think. Meanwhile, what I think all these spontaneous efforts like mine, Raul, and many Latin Americans, for example, I know, what I think they have done is to understand, take the veil from their eyes about the Palestinian reality, and I think we have succeeded in containing the propaganda. Because at this point, with all the massive influx of resources that the Zionists have put into propaganda, at this point, basically, Palestine should even be penalized to be mentioned. At this point, everywhere. So all this, I think these efforts have been so useful for people to
Definitely.
at least have curiosity and say, I have seen YouTubers, Latin American YouTubers going to Palestine and saying, wow, it's not like they tell us, right? So all this, at least it has contained the Palestinian
Yeah.
cause and
Yeah.
struggle alive. Now it's time to organize in this kind of initiative. Of course, it's going to be a long way. Maybe I won't see it at the end. I have 49 years. Maybe I won't see it at the end. I hope Raul does. He's way younger. I hope my kid can see it. But we have to do it happily and with all the soul that we can put into it. Because
Yeah.
basically, something new. There is no
Yeah.
vision. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
I,
Sarah, I apologize. I took some time to go back to your question. So, Sarah has two questions. Do you, Raul, and George belong to any political organizations in Latin America? And are there political movements or parties in Latin America that support the Palestinian cause and one democratic state in particular?
so personally, I am not involved in any political organization. I am not a member of anything, and I'm not involved in any political organization. And the second question, if there are political movements or parties that support the Palestinian cause, to be honest, I'm not sure if they formally support the Palestinian cause, but yes, it's sure, as George said, that a lot of people support the Palestinian cause. And there are some things like parades or events organized in Palestinian clubs or the society that they do it. And people go out to the streets with the flags of Palestine. And like when the Nakba Day comes, people go out, Palestinian flags with Palestinian music. And people saying freedom from the river to the sea and all of this. But at the end of the day, it's cultural, it's not political. And I also believe that Latin America, especially, is parties do not actually put a lot of effort, or they really don't care about the Palestinian cause, because of course it goes against the United States policies, and a lot of Latin America depends economically on the United States. So a lot of these countries don't like to go in the country because it goes against their own well-being and their own economic interests. So this is like, economically speaking, this is a barrier for Palestinian support. And when it comes to the people, what I mentioned before, there is a lack of leadership, a lack of a national consensus or conscience around what the liberation of Palestine actually means, what it entails, and what should be done. And because currently this place is occupied by the PA, and we all know that the PA is not interested in a good future for Palestine, and actually is working against us. So this is a big problem that as a nation we have, because we actually don't have a voice, we don't have a political platform, and we have others that like to say that they represent us, but they are doing the opposite job. I mean, and people go out, or like these ambassadors go out with the people in the clubs and they in the parades for Palestine, and people are saying freedom, free Palestine from the river to the sea. People carrying the flag of Palestine of 1948, the flag, but at the same time, the ambassadors are saying yes, if they're wanting for a two-state solution with East Jerusalem as the capital. So, how we as a people be claiming or wanting for a liberated Palestine, while at the same time our so-called representatives only want to supposedly liberate 22% of Palestine. So if we have a big problem if the people say one thing and our leaders say another thing that goes against what the people want. So the first thing that needs to be done from the Palestinian internal position is to actually organize towards this future, this vision, like hopefully a political reformation that is attached to the ODS vision that can come to replace the current so-called Palestinian leadership.
Okay, thank you, Raul. George, do you have an answer to Sarah's question? So you mentioned you were not in any organization. Are there political movements or parties that support the Palestinian cause or ODS as a vision?
Yeah, in Colombia, at least we have a leftist. As a matter of fact, the president, Gustavo Petro, which is considered leftist, even though I have my reservations about that, but he is he's vocal sometimes on Palestine, right? He we have a very difficult situation in Colombia, a very violent history here, and it's not easy to be someone different from the establishment. Despite all of this, Gustavo Petro, our president, he has been vocal on his Twitter account, which is his main communication outlet, on Palestine. Even though it's clear he's not, he's very diplomatic, and he's very careful of what he says, but he has at least manifested his support for an independent, free Palestine. Of course, the two-state normalization crap always, because that's the sure thing to say. But different from the other presidents we have had, the last one, Duque, which is absolutely affiliated with the Zionist cause. As a matter of fact, he was secretary on the Palmer Commission when they exonerated Israel on the massacre of the Marmara in 2010, I guess. Right? So at least the president and his party, which is now strong, way stronger than before, many of those who survived the annihilation attempt in the 90s by the right extremists, many of them support vocally Palestine. But this is not that strong, because I guess with some, as given a certain point, with some pressure from the United States, I think they will just shut up about it. So it's not something like they really radically, we can trust them. No, I wouldn't say that. So there's not a movement. I repeat, what we have done, I think, spontaneously, is try to contain the Zionist propaganda and educate people. This shows in a political action in many ways, when people, if you can see, many people, I mean, people that you have no idea they existed or they believed on Palestine, they answer to the Israeli outlets and they claim justice for Palestine, and they don't go to Israeli events, and they attack and they criticize politicians that ally with Israel. So this is something, for me, it's huge, because at this point we shouldn't even have that with all the odds against. So this is a good starting point for some more organized political initiative, like what you have shown, right?
Yes, it's clear. Sarah, thanks you for your answer. She said we should discuss in more detail how we can use the Palestinian cultural platforms and scene to present and promote the ODS solution and organize around it. And Raul, she's saying she knows you're already doing a great job.
Thank you.
So Hassan is no longer here. So if no one has anything to add, maybe we can conclude.
Well,
okay. So thank you. Yep, go ahead.
No, that especially that it's like the problem right now, that internally we don't have as a nation a representation, and we're lacking a actually competent leadership that can actually represent the people in the aspirations of liberation of the people internationally, and that's our biggest problem. And at the end of the day, for example, I recently read that Mexico recognized Palestine or something like that, and people celebrate that. But at the end of the day, they don't really have in their minds that Mexico did not recognize Palestine, or actually don't recognize, but the PA in a two-state solution. That does not mean the liberation of Palestine. So a big education is needed on the Palestinian side about what the liberation of Palestine actually means and how it should be done, which is the one democratic state solution, that vision. That's what needs to be formed, but of course it's not as easy as to speak it. But it has to start somewhere, and because we cannot expect a better future or a change if we continue in the same place and doing the same things and not actually resisting from new methods or new ways.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think complementing what perfectly Raul have said, and for example, as he said, my city, Barranquilla, where I was born, huge influence of Palestinians, one of the most strongest receptacle of Palestinian diaspora in Colombia. It's Bethlehem is sister city of Barranquilla. What have this represented for?
Oh.
Nothing absolutely. And there's not one. I mean, the friend of mine that buys the kufiyeh from Al Halil with a huge effort, because it's not easy to get merchandise from Palestine to Colombia. It's very difficult. He does it by himself. He has asked help from the Palestinian diplomacy. Zero help. He wanted to import Roman, Granada in Spanish, the fruit, Roman. And the Palestinian embassy didn't even know where they were producing Palestine. I know this for sure. So meanwhile, I think the way it's first education on the public, sensibilization with education for main people, and the most you can politicians, appeal to humanity, appeal to decency, which is something not very common in politics. But I mean, you have to appeal on that. You have to bet on that. That's the bet. That's the decent bet we have to do. And 3, start organizing with all these academic and media efforts. Start building bridges with diaspora in more developed Palestinian diaspora scenarios, like in Europe, in Turkey, in the United States, like yours. Starting to building these bridges, because at some point, all the work, spontaneous and free work that many of us are doing here, sometimes disorganized, sometimes more emotional than academic, etc., but efforts at the end. All this massive support we are seeing in media every day growing on Palestine, this will be a wind for the wings of the third solution, of the third way, for a solution like you're saying. So with this education and building bridges with the diaspora, this is the best we can do now, I think. And this is the opposite thing we can do now, because meanwhile you have Abbas and all his bunch of thugs, there's nothing else beyond. But this, don't subestimate this.
And as well, to ignite again the spark on the people, because recently I was in Palestine and like people don't actually want to speak about it. When I try to open a conversation about the future or the solution, people say, the young people say especially that, oh, there's no future, there's no solution, I don't know what will happen, I don't want to talk about it. And so like we need to as well remember that people in Palestine, they are normal people that want to live their life, want to just pursue their dreams in their homeland, but they can't do it because they have been deprived by it, by the Zionist colonization. And so at the same time, the lack of a political leadership and representation has made people to, plus the repression that comes if you speak against it, against the authority in the land, has made the people to become inactive around the cause and be unwilling to speak about it or actually have hopes for the future. And so this is a problem, because if we stay like this, we are serving the Zionist wills of the people to forget about it or just normalize the reality. Why not this? It should be the opposite, for the people to continue resisting and willing to work for change. And that's why what I think that needs to be instilled inside the minds of the people in the framework of the vision of the one democratic secular state from the river to the sea.
And I want to add that this work, I know it's not only on social media and on one-to-one. There are some politicians, at least in my country, and I know Salvador, Chile is huge. Chile, it's a great work they are doing in the political spectrum. But here in my country, personally, I'm working on some politicians for sensibilization and it's not a guarantee because I have nothing else to offer. I don't have the money to support their campaign. But I'm appealing to their decency, and I'm finding some friends in the political spectrum. I know for sure some politicians will defend Palestine in the legislative scenario in Colombia.
That's great.
So if one simple person can do it, if you add all these little efforts, I'm sure we can do way better than the PA.
And as well, as you alone mentioned, there's going to be a meeting with Mustafa Barghouti. I think that like these types of conversations or contacting these people that have a history around the cause and have experience around it, I believe that there should be or like contact all these intellectuals that are pro the ODS solution to group them or like contact every one of them to unite towards the same goal and actually organize around it by these type of people that are educated about the topic and are willing to do something about it. That can be easier in order to materialize this vision and work for it. And I hope that the meeting goes positive and maybe Mustafa could do something of help.
Yeah, Mustafa. But look, for example, the Colombian environment minister, Susana Muhammad, she's Palestinian origin, right? And she was a councilman from the councilwoman for the capital city, Bogota. And with her support, they named a street, a main street with the name State of Palestine. Of course, this doesn't change anything on the reality on the ground in Palestine, but this is a huge example of what with a will can do. And what we can do is to drive Latin America to be diplomatically correct in the law and in the justice as it was when, for example, Colombia didn't vote in favor of creating Israel in 1947, November 29. Colombia abstained. With all the pressures there were, Colombia abstained. My goal is to Colombia, despite the right wing that may come, it's very strong and very violent here, try to Colombia maintain at least their frame of international legal advocacy. This is at least something I'm trying to work for. And translate this to Latin America. This is what we can do here.
And
Meanwhile,
as well, before concluding, I believe that a very sensitive point, especially in Europe, due to the history of the Holocaust and how sensitive it is. I believe that something that we Palestinians need to answer and make it public is that we need to understand, like, we need to put ourselves in the position of other people, because if we want to solve a problem, we need to look at it from different points of view and different perspectives, and look at it at how people from different backgrounds look at it. And for example, I'm pretty clear that the biggest fear of the Israelis is that if Palestine is free, they will once again be persecuted as they have been throughout history. And so that's, and in Europe as well, I also believe that that's one of the points of a lack of Palestinian support, of this fear of what will happen if Palestine is free and Palestinians get back control of the land, what will happen to the Israelis. And so like this negative speculation around it of the Hasbara that we want to throw the Jews to the sea, which is false, needs to be answered with a response that actually says that that's absolutely not the case, but rather, which is what the ODS solution proposes, which instead of having this argument that is Arabs versus Jews and that is hatred and or like racism or anti-Semitism. No, I mean to focus the point on the politicization of identity as the initiative does, and to make the goal to abolish this politicization of identity and to not claim the land because of history or not, but rather to decolonize the land into a place where everyone, despite their identity, their origins, their backgrounds, are equal citizens of the territory with the same access to the resources of the land, where no religion imposes itself as the authority in the land, hence a secular state. And to tell or to direct the message to the Jewish people that the liberation of Palestine does not mean something against them specifically, but against the Zionist settler colonial movement, and that actually it would benefit them because it would separate them from all the harm that Zionism has caused to Judaism, that it has stained their image, and to finally claim that a free Palestine can also be a place where can also become a safe haven for the Jewish people, but this time not at the expense of the Palestinian people. Because the problem is right now, after 75 years, multiple generations of Israelis have been born in the land. They didn't choose to be born in the Israeli occupation of Palestine. No one chooses to be born where they are born. No one chooses their identity, their nationality. And so these people, the Israelis, they were born there. Since they were born, they have been indoctrinated by the Zionist system to think what they think and to act how they act. And the way they think and the things they do is the manifestation of the Zionist ideology coming into reality. And so to attack that by saying that a free Palestine would actually free them from this connection that Zionism has made, how Zionism has manipulated Judaism for its own political agenda, and saying that a free Palestine through the ODS vision would actually provide a true peace and safety for them as well with the Palestinians, and that that they can continue existing in the land, but this time not at our expense, which is basically the problem of the situation right now and throughout history.
By the way, I'm Raul. The moment it's what I'm going to say is much less important than your discussion. But when you were talking in Spanish with George, I met another side of you. It was like a different personality.
Yes.
Okay, so I was glad to have this discussion, George. I love your spirit. I think your heart is at the right place. I hope everything you're doing can accomplish something. Well, I know it will accomplish something. It's already changing something, so that's great. I took your number from Yusuf, so I will send it to Raul. I will also say hi, so we have each other's number.
Please write me WhatsApp, Raul. Feel free. I'm really bad with WhatsApp and all that. I'm very clumsy, so muy torpe. Entonces, please write me anytime so we can keep in contact. And thank you, Alain, for inviting me. My honor, and you have a brother here in Colombia, and thanks to Joseph, I think he's watching. My brother Joseph Al Jamal in Istanbul, and I love him like a brother. He knows, and I hope to see him next year somewhere in Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George Semhan Gutierrez, and thank you also for the Palestine Dialogue Group for organizing this. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Ciao, Raul.
Yes.